Well, greetings and welcome. It's great to imagine you there. Jonathan Foust here. I will be leading the following meditation and the following talk. Before we begin, a couple announcements. I have the usual thank yous. First of all, the thank you to our producers, to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo for all their work, to our mindful movement teachers, and to our mindful dialogue leaders. The full smorgasbord experience for Monday nights starts at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time with mindful movement, and then glides right into this meditation, and then into the Dharma talk, and then afterward at 8:45 you can join Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy. This will be the last time that Ray and Tara will be offering mindful dialogue for the summer. Well, the plan is to be back in September, but it's summertime. So just to be aware of that. Also, thank you for your support. This is all offered freely so that no one is denied access to these practices and these teachings. Thank you so much. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. It's got my photography and talk summaries and stuff like that. Tonight's topic is a really interesting one to me. This is an encore talk, and it is about awakening inner wisdom, about awakening the inner guru. I'll do a little longer intro after that, but I also want to let you know over the summer we're going to experiment with a 1-hour class. So in the future it's going to be a shorter meditation and then right into the talk. So I hope that works for you. Please enjoy the following meditation and happy trails. I'd like to set the context for this meditation to tell you a little bit about the technique, and then we'll practice together. This is a technique which falls into the realm of concentration, in that you are directing your attention in a specific way, and yet it is rather different. It uses inquiry, or the form of questions, to direct your attention. So I'll be offering a question that will invite you to feel or imagine sensation or space in and around the body. As I offer each question, you'll have about 15 or 20 seconds just simply to draw your attention to where that inquiry takes you. It's a form of a body scan, but it's somewhat different in that you are directing your attention to the perception of space, to the perception of volume or weight, both in the body and around the body. So as you're ready, you can close your eyes. Can you feel or imagine the space between your eyes? Can you feel or imagine the space between your forehead and the back of your head? Is it possible to imagine the space inside your ears? Can you imagine this perception of space as effortless? Can you feel or imagine the space inside the sinus cavities in your head? Can you feel or imagine the space between your tongue and the roof of your mouth? Can you feel or imagine the space or the volume of your lips? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space or the distance between the base of your tongue and the crown of your head? Can you feel or imagine the space between your chin and your lower lip? Can you feel or imagine the space between your upper teeth and your lower teeth? Can you feel or imagine the space inside your throat? Can you feel or imagine the space inside your lungs? Can you imagine this perception of space as effortless? Can you imagine the space between your right shoulder and your right elbow? Can you feel or imagine the space between your right elbow and your right wrist? Can you feel or imagine the space between your right thumb and your right forefinger? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space inside your right thumb? Can you feel or imagine the space inside your right forefinger? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space or the volume of the middle finger, the right hand? Can you feel or imagine the space or the volume of the ring finger of the right hand? Can you feel or imagine the space or the volume of the pinky finger of the right hand? Can you feel or imagine the space between each of the fingers? Can you feel or imagine the space between the skin on the palm of the right hand and the skin on the back of the right hand? Is it possible to feel or imagine the weight, the length, and the volume of the right shoulder, the right arm, the right hand, the thumb and fingers?
Can you feel or imagine the space inside the left shoulder joint? Can you feel or imagine the space between the left shoulder and the left elbow? Can you feel or imagine the space between the left elbow and the left wrist? Can you imagine this perception of space as effortless? Can you imagine the space inside the left thumb? Can you imagine the volume or the space inside the left forefinger? Can you feel or imagine the volume or the space inside the middle finger of the left hand? Can you feel or imagine the space inside the ring finger of the left hand? Can you feel or imagine the space or the volume of the pinky finger of the left hand? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space between each of the fingers? Is it possible to feel or imagine the weight, the volume, the density of the left shoulder, the left arm, the left hand, the thumb and fingers? Can you feel or imagine the space between your left thumb and your left forefinger while simultaneously feeling or imagining the space between the right thumb and the right forefinger? Can you feel or imagine the space between your breastbone and your spine? Can you feel or imagine the space between your navel and your spine? Can you feel or imagine the space between your navel and your pubic bone? Can you feel or imagine the space between your pubic bone and your tailbone? Can you imagine the space between the right hip and the left hip? Is it possible to feel or imagine the weight, the volume, the length of the right leg and the right foot? Can you feel or imagine the length, the weight, the volume of the left leg and the left foot? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space between your navel and your spine while simultaneously feeling or imagining the space between your forehead and the back of your head? Can you imagine this perception of space as effortless? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space inside your body? Can you feel or imagine the space outside your body? Is it possible to feel or imagine the space inside your body and the space outside your body as one continuous space? Is it possible to feel the aliveness inside and outside your body while simultaneously feeling this continuous space? Can you imagine this perception of space as effortless? In these remaining minutes, resting in presence.
Well, welcome back. Just a few things before we launch into this talk. The first is to let you know that we're going to suspend the mindful dialogue after the talk for the summer. So big thanks to Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy for their very generous offering. We'll pick that up again in September. Also, in the future, through the summer at least, we're gonna experiment with an hour-long class. So it'll be a shorter meditation and pretty much the same length talk. So just know that that's there. So I started a talk to prepare a talk for tonight, and it turned into a three-part series. So I'm going to set that up. We're going to do that in a couple of weeks. So what I'd like to offer is an encore talk from 2019 on awakening the guru within. This is a topic pretty near and dear to my heart because I was in a guru relationship for many years, a formal relationship to a teacher. And you know, we all have teachers that have shaped who we are. Some come from a lineage, others don't. It's really important to explore the impact and the importance of external teachers, but also to remember that all teachers are pointing to the awakening of our own inner guidance. That's what this talk explores. I hope you find it helpful. And thank you so much. Many blessings. Enjoy this talk on awakening the guru within. There's a story of a guy who goes on a quest for truth. Trekking into the Himalayas, he hears of this teacher at the top of a mountain, and after many arduous days of traveling and thinking about what he was going to say and finally getting to the top and really pulling on all the resilience he had, he was a very resilient, strong-willed guy, he finally makes his way to the cave of the guru. And he says, finally, with his question, well, what is the secret of happiness? And the guru looks deep in his eyes and says, don't argue with idiots. And the guy says, that's nonsense. That's completely ridiculous. What a stupid answer. And the guru pauses, looks at him and says, you're absolutely right. One of those Zen jokes. You are the product of your teachers. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how, as the product of all the teachers in your life, they have shaped your perspective, your conditioning, and who you are. I'd like to talk a little bit about the form of teachers, how some teachers come from a lineage and some teachers don't come from a lineage. And how, when you really want to wake up, we need to look to those who've walked the path before. And ultimately, as we look toward the external teachers that can support us in our lives, we need to be aware of awakening of what we call the inner guru or the inner teacher, or your own intuitive sense that is informed by both wisdom and a heart that can hold it all. So we are the product of our teachers. I remember once sitting around the dining room table, and we were talking about the moon landing. I think I was in 5th grade. And my father made some comment about who was going to get there first, the Russians or the Americans. And I blurted out, I said, but Dad, we have to get to the moon first, because if we don't get to the moon first, the Russians are going to get there first, and they're going to set up laser stations and beam us off the face of the planet. And he looked at me and said, where did you get that from? It was from my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Shooker, who had me utterly convinced and paranoid about the possibility of getting beamed off the face of the planets by the Russians. I imagine you have had some bad teachers in your life, or maybe even not bad teachers, but maybe ill-informed teachers. I remember once watching some birthing videos and supporting a birth. And what was so interesting was one video was this California couple, and they had their hot tub and their candles and their incense and all that really, really fun stuff. And it was all very, very calm and really, really peaceful. And the contrasting video was a video of a family from Michigan. And the whole family was there through this whole birthing process. And people would come and go. They had an open bar. There were mixed drinks. You know, the baby is, you know, the woman's in labor, and there are these family arguments around the bed and yelling. And it was unbelievable. And I thought that what a horrible, horrible way to bring a baby into the world. But then I realized, no, this is the world. This is the life this baby has. This is going to be the teachers and the environment this baby comes into. So we pick up stimuli and conditioning really, really fast for better or worse. My father was a role model for me. He had a great sense of humor, really smart, really, really witty guy. Everyone loved my father. And he also had PTSD from World War II. He was kind of cut off from his feelings. And as much as I, in my modeling, took on all of his positive traits, I'm aware that I also took on the undigested parts of his own life. Carl Jung said quite famously something to the effect of that there is no influence on our institutions, and particularly on our children, than the unlived lives of the parents. So we are the product of our parents or primary caretakers as teachers for all of the benefit that they provide, but we also embody their wounds. We also embody what is unlived. And so as we look toward influential teachers, and when we think about the teachers that have really, really touched us in our lives, if you think about some of your favorite teachers, chances are that they loved what they were teaching, that they had something that they really enjoyed about a particular topic. I was never good at math. But I had a math teacher in 9th grade who just loved it. And I couldn't not feel his enthusiasm and pick up on that a little bit. So when it comes to learning, there are all kinds of studies on optimal ways that you can learn anything in life. And part of those elements are, first of all, having practice. Having some kind of practice where you're trying new, challenging material again and again and again. And with practice comes a form of discipline. It requires a certain kind of resilience that you keep trying, you keep going. The next element is getting feedback and correction. And this is where having a teacher comes in very, very handy. Where the teacher can say, you might want to try it this way, or look at how I do it. Try this. And this is where modeling is so important when it comes to kind of the pedagogy of learning. You can read about getting the perfect golf swing, but if you watch a masterful golfer and you watch them do the swing again and again and again, and you start to feel it in your body, and suddenly you're beginning to model exactly what that golf swing is all about, you begin to really embody that. And here again, when you look toward models, we get the pluses and the minuses. Back in my ashram days, I was really into learning hands-on healing. It was just something I was quite passionate about. And there was one particular body worker who was masterful. People would come from all over the world to have this guy put their hands on him. He had a real gift. he was leading a training. And so I decided to employ these neuro-linguistic programming techniques, which basically says, if someone has something you want, do exactly what they do, and you'll have what they have. And so I decided to model myself after this particular teacher. So I would walk like him. I would breathe like him. He had a certain way of sort of like palpating a body where he'd turn his head to one side and breathe through his nose. And I would do exactly that. He would do a move on me, then I would do a move on him to make sure that I got it exactly how he did it. And one of the most wonderful compliments I ever got, which was maybe a month or so later, I was working on another senior body worker. And as soon as I put my hands on, he said, "Wow, you feel exactly like this other teacher." So I picked up all the wonderful, wonderful traits from him. And I'm deeply grateful for that. And I employ that learning technique a lot. Whenever I'm learning anything, I look for who's the best, who's got it. And then I just become them as best as I can. And now, on the other hand, there was a time when, out of my own scarcity thinking, I thought, I got to make some money. And this was during the high-tech boom. So I signed up with a guy, and his name was Michael Murphy. I have no idea where he is now, but he was the high-tech guru, investing guy at that time. And I just decided if Michael Murphy tells me to wear red underwear for the next month, I'm going to wear red underwear. Whatever he tells me, I'm going to do. And so when Cisco fell from 60 to 40 and he said, if you loved it at 60, you're going to adore it at 40, back up the truck, load it up. And I lost all my money. So there's something here around make sure that you know what you want. Make sure you've got teachers that are really lined up with what you really, really want. Now, you can have teachers that can support you in learning things and learning techniques and learning technologies. But if you really want to wake up in your life, then the question becomes, well, how do you find a spiritual teacher that's going to support you, that's going to be a model for you? For a number of years, I had a guru, not a tech guru or a writing guru, but a guru. He was one of the first major teachers who came from India. He was from Gujarat, India. And I literally stumbled into his ashram. And as I often joke, I came for lunch and I stayed for 24 years. I fully gave myself to his teachings. I took a new name. I had a poverty vow, a celibacy vow. I focused intensively on being the best disciple I could be. He was a renowned teacher, and he was accomplished in many, many ways. He was charismatic. He was loving. He really knew how to make you feel loved, and he was tapped into some incredible energy. He had a capacity to sort of embody and channel energy that was like nothing I had ever experienced before. And so I absolutely gave myself to his teachings. I had the opportunity to work with him quite a bit. I was his warm-up act on the road for his seminars. I loved being with him. He had a great sense of humor, but also there was something off, and I couldn't quite figure it out. The ashram I lived in was a very devotional community. I was never a particularly devotional guy, but I was devoted to the work we were doing. And thousands of people were coming and being deeply transformed and inspired and returning to their lives changed. And being part of that was one of the great blessings of my life. And just as my dad, who was a teacher for me, who had his gifts and his wounds, so did this teacher. Ram Dass famously said that Westerners went to the East to get enlightened, and Eastern teachers came to the West and got horny. In our community, there was infidelity. There was financial impropriety. And in 1994, the walls came tumbling down. The entire community basically crashed. As you can imagine, it was devastating. We had over 300 people in our community, and many, many, many people had devoted their lives. Many women had decided not to have children because that was generally encouraged in the community, and it's too late now for them. And the sense of betrayal ran very, very deep. And I imagine we've all been betrayed. I imagine you've been betrayed at times. When you put your stock into someone and you suddenly see it crash. The community went through incredible upheaval. We brought in an organization that focused on sexual misconduct in the clergy, and we watched a video of sort of what typically happens in a church when there's sort of a calling out of the leader with abuse of power or whatever, and we absolutely fit the model. There were those who violently defended him, those who wanted to burn the place down, those who just left. Incredibly, incredibly disorienting. However, what I found for myself was that the flip side of betrayal is that you get your life back. And there was something very powerful about having to move on, having an entire foundation where I'd been for so many years suddenly gone, and having to decide, what do I do now? Where do I go now? And so with all the disorientation, we all had to move on. And for 3 years, I traveled and teaching on the road, and then I returned to the community to help shift the community to a more secular, non-sectarian center. And of all those people, we all moved on. Some wounded, some still healing, and many, many people thriving. So there's a very interesting element here. And you may see this as you're looking towards spiritual traditions and spiritual teachers, and that is the distinction between the lineage versus non-lineage traditions. One of the advantages of lineage traditions, and that is where your teacher has a teacher and their teacher has a teacher, and there's a sense of the wisdom and the mantle and the power being handed down through the lineage. One of the big advantages there is there's a sense of what you can kind of think of as quality control. You know, if someone is going to be empowered to teach, you trust that power is only handed down because that person deserves it. That person has lived and grown inside the tradition where now they embody it, and they will carry forth the best of that tradition. That's what we hope and assume that comes from the best of the lineage traditions. On the other hand, a lineage tradition sort of has a quality of infantilizing the followers. There's a sense of, here's the guru, here's the teacher on the pedestal, and you'll never get there. They got it from their teacher, who got it from their teacher, who got it from their teacher. So if you totally surrender to this teacher, then you too can possibly receive the transmission. But it's the power coming from above, coming down through that tradition. There's a quality of it that can be extraordinary when there's a purity of the lineage, the incredible, exquisite quality of surrendering fully to something. Unbelievable. However, there's a shadow side to it, and certainly we've seen this in our culture, that wherever there is power over others, there tends to be an abuse of that power, an assumption of taken by those in power that leads to a sense of entitlement. And one of the things I sort of celebrate with the crashing of the ashrams, all the main ashrams and all schools and churches, that wherever there's power over others, it seems that our culture or our planetary consciousness or whatever you want to call it cannot tolerate that. It's being outed all over the place. And there's something incredibly powerful about that, as disorienting as it can be. So some traditions embrace this lineage approach and others don't. And one of the things I found so empowering, moving from a lineage tradition, and when I sort of stumbled into teaching kind of in the riverbanks of the Buddhist tradition, at least through kind of the Theravadan tradition, is that this tradition actively celebrates the non-lineage aspect of teaching, where the teacher is considered a spiritual friend. For me, I find that to be incredibly empowering because it allows me to be me. It allows everyone to be exactly where they are. And I really do feel that, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, we're moving from an age of gurus to an age of wounded healers, where each one of us is in our own journey of awakening, and we also have access to great wisdom. And I just realized that was actually Andrew Harvey who said that. Predicted this back in the 80s, before all the ashrams fell, this sense of moving from gurus to an age of wounded healers. It was Thich Nhat Hanh who said, the guru is the sangha, that the teacher is the community, which in essence says the same thing, that we're here to learn from each other, to empower each other as teachers. So back to this idea of look at who has what you want, do exactly what they do, and you'll have what they have. Part of what we explore when we're awakening wisdom is to look to those who have walked the path before us. There's a story of a grandparent talking with his grandchild in elementary school, and he says, hey, your mom tells me you're having trouble in history class. I loved history. Well, what's your problem? And the little kid says to his grandfather, well, there wasn't as much of it for you to learn when you were my age. We learn from history. We learn from the collective understanding that we have developed together. If you were on a deserted island with nothing but natural materials to work with, how long do you imagine it would take you to create an iPhone? You know, we take advantage of the discoveries of those who've come before us and walked the path before us. And this ties into this whole idea of evolutionary biology, that we are perhaps, I hope, evolving and learning as we evolve as a species. And I've also found in many ways that some of the best advice I've gotten from people are from people who've made terrible mistakes in their lives. When I was president of a large organization, someone on the board said to me, you know, you've made some really bad mistakes. You need to make better decisions. I said, I know. How do I do that? And he said, by making bad decisions. So we need to learn how to be skillful in life. And if you're really committed to waking up to what is true, like perennial truth, the truth that was true 3,000 years ago and will be true 3,000 years from now, what others have learned can be immensely helpful for us. They can save us a lot of time. The challenge is to find a way to explore in a tradition that feels right for you, that feels balanced. If you are told that God is a Caucasian male sitting on a throne in the clouds and the streets are paved with gold, should you take that at face value? Where does faith play in this? If you're told that a 2,000-year-old document is absolutely true, every single word, should you believe it? Every tradition I know of has some fantastical story in their origin. There's a story of how when the Buddha was born, he walked at birth, and after each step, a flower sprung up from the earth. Really? Or if you live a holy life, you'll be surrounded by 70 virgins when you leave this plane. Or when you die, you'll be welcomed by all your loved ones and sit by Jesus' side for eternity. And on and on. This really brings up the question when it comes to awakening wisdom and following teachers and traditions, an interesting distinction around faith and devotion. Some traditions say that faith and devotion is a direct path. That when you completely surrender to a path and a tradition and a teaching, there is a level of surrender that fills you with truth and bliss and insight. Just believe the purity of your heart and you go right into communion. And there's something to be said for that. At the same time, when you cultivate sort of blind faith, there is a possibility that in your naivete, you'll be ripe for manipulation. But if you simply live in a doubting mind, you will be paralyzed and eternally cynical. So the distinction I have found so helpful in my practice is the distinction between blind faith and what's called verified faith. And that is where you actively cultivate a doubting mind, but at the same time stay open to the field of infinite possibility. This is one of the beauties that I have so appreciated about the Buddhist tradition, and with the Buddha allegedly saying repeatedly, do not believe a word of what I'm telling you. You must verify this for yourself. And this becomes a very powerful part of practice. So, for example, when you hear the teaching that anything born of causes and conditions is subject to change, the teaching on anicca or impermanence, you don't necessarily take that as blind faith. Oh, everything changes. You actively explore, is that true? That everything born of causes and conditions is subject to change. When you take that teaching and you actively verify it for yourself, incredibly transformational. Because you are shifting from this as simply a belief to a very deep knowing inside. Cultivating faith, a verified, mature faith in any tradition is absolutely integral to waking up. And so we all look outside for teachers. We all look outside for guidance. And ultimately, what this is all about is awakening our own inner knowing, our own inner guru, if you will. So my guru would often talk about awakening the inner guru. And the question is, well, what is a guru? You know, you could be a teacher or a guide, but this is so corny. Ultimately, I think it points back to the spelling. G, you are you. I'm just back from a retreat that I led on meditation and intuition. And I'm fascinated by this nexus point between cultivating non-judging awareness and cultivating a strong sense of intuition or inner knowing. How do we actually know anything? One of the questions I can't help myself when I'm talking with someone who is just gone through a breakup or a divorce, I always ask this question: when did you first know it wasn't going to work? And I would say 80% of the time, people will respond, I knew in the beginning. How can that be? How can that be that we had this inner felt sense of knowing it wasn't going to work, and yet we proceeded? So there's so much to talk about when it comes to awakening the inner guru. But I just wanted to close this talk with a particular exercise that you can explore. And it's a very interesting way that can help you to begin to kind of tune into your own inner knowing, to that sense of own inner guidance. And it has to do with a question that you can ask yourself before you head into any particular activity. And the question is, how do you want to feel at the end? So a story that I've told before, I'll share it again. A couple of years ago, I had a family gathering to go to, a week with family. And I noticed that once the date was set, maybe like 6 months ahead, I was already feeling resentful and shut down and judgmental and resentful. And it didn't change over time. It just kind of grew. And I realized I was heading into this vacation with a deep sense of dread. And so once I recognized this, I asked myself, how did I want to feel at the end of this gathering? I have a pretty realistic sense of what's possible, I think. And I couldn't imagine all of us standing in a circle, holding hands, and singing Kumbaya at the end of the week. What I came up with was, I wanted to feel good about myself. I wanted to feel like I did the best job I could. And so one of the things I kind of carry into family stuff, and we've all got family stuff, is kind of a sense of kind of feeling unseen and unheard and, unappreciated. And what happens is I kind of start devolving into a sniveling 13-year-old where I become resentful and I withdraw and become judgmental. And I may not be the only person who does that. It's what I do. And so when I thought about this, how do I want to feel at the end? I want to feel good about myself. Then I sort of imagined what it would be like at the end of that week to feel good about myself, and then look back and ask myself a couple questions. The first one is, well, what attitude adjustment might be required? The second question, what behaviors would help facilitate that? And the third, what would I need? What kind of support would I need to cultivate that? So to the first question, in terms of what attitude adjustment, was the recognition that if I wanted to be seen and heard, maybe I should start seeing and hearing people first. Maybe I should show some interest instead of assuming there was no interest in my direction. What behaviors would be required? Well, staying in the room and not leaving, and staying when it got uncomfortable, and making sure I took care of myself. Which kind of led to the third question, what support would I need? And I realized, well, I need my own downtime. I'm deeply introverted, so rather than try to work with the whole group, maybe I could focus on real quality one-on-one connections. And also ask some support from my wife, as she was intimately involved in this, and kind of bring her in on my intention. And so as the week came and I went through the week, there were a couple times when when all the circumstances were just perfect for me to start moving into my old patterning of withdrawal and resentment and judgment. And in those moments, fortunately, I had a flash of remembering, wait a minute, how do I want to feel at the end? And it allowed me to kind of stay on that wave of resistance. And on the other side was feeling better, feeling okay. And lo and behold, at the end of that week, I actually did feel good about myself. So I use this technique a lot, even when I've got a phone call. How do I want to feel at the end of the phone call? And then just listen. What attitude adjustment would be required? What behaviors would be helpful? And what would I need to facilitate that outcome? And what's interesting is when you ask those questions, you have to listen. And that is the wisdom faculty that will emerge when we can suspend our judgments, be open, and notice what arises in that question. When it comes to being healthy, no one really needs to be told what they need to do. We all know we need exercise and diet and sleep, and the question is, how do we do it? And the wisdom faculty is what ultimately guides you, that helps you to set up the support systems that you need and want. But ultimately, just as you're asking yourself, how do you want to feel at the end? You can apply that to very specific issues. But you also need to apply it in the broadest perspective possible, which is, how do you want to feel at the end of your life? At the end of your life, what does a life of no regret look like? Through this lens of Buddhist psychology, we're reminded again and again that you and everyone you know is going to disappear in no particular order. How does that help you to prioritize what you want and what you need? The number one regret of the dying is, I was not true to myself. And the question is, what does that mean to you to be true? What are you doing in your life that is not true to you, and what would need to change? These are some of the questions that help us to begin to sense this inner knowing inside. So I'd like to close with a short reflection where we'll kind of move into these questions. I'll give you a little bit of time to reflect on them. And what you'll do is bring into mind some outcome that you'd like to explore. This could be a difficult conversation you're going to have. It could be what you're going to have for dinner tonight, or you might like to even apply these questions to the broader perspective of this life in front of you. So as you're ready, if you like, you can close your eyes, not if you're driving, but take a few moments to deepen your breath. And bring into mind, if you like, some particular specific event that lies ahead. Or you might open this inquiry up to the rest of your life. And choose a point of time. It might be when it's done, or maybe when it's in process. And ask yourself now, how do I want to feel at the end or at this point? And if you can, take some time to let a true feeling come up from the inside. What does that feel like on the inside? This sense of how you'd like to feel at the end or at this point of time. Can you find a word or two that describes its location or quality of feeling. Could you imagine that feeling getting big? How big could it get? And if you can, let yourself just sort of rest here with this sense of deeply sensing how you'd like to feel at the end, and feel it alive as you can right now. And as you reflect on this sense of your future self, looking back on yourself right now, asking the following question and listening to whatever may arise for you. What attitude adjustment would be required to help facilitate this outcome? What behaviors or actions would be helpful to facilitate this outcome? And what would you need? What would most support you in facilitating this outcome? And if you like now, letting this fall away, coming into your breath, and just sensing the quality of presence. We all naturally look outside of ourselves for guidance, ultimately what we are looking for is what is already inside. And you might sense in these final moments your capacity for wisdom, to see clearly into the nature of reality. And sensing as well the quality of what we could call the awakened heart. Your access to compassion, kindness, joy, steadiness, a heart that can hold it all. And when you're ready, you can deepen your breath. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. And thank you so much for your time and attention. May you and your inner guru have a wonderful journey together. Thank you.